welcome. I'm back. In this segment, well, this is a segment, but it's going to be, in a sense, I'm going to break it up into four parts. We're going to talk about the most important people who ever lived. This is supposed to be a really fun video for me, educational video for you. It's going to be tough because when it comes to stuff like this, people tend to get into morality. They tend to get into maybe different isms. If you from a certain culture, certain race, you want to see your culture, your race up here. And one of the reasons why I made this was because people who have made this list before tend to come from the Eurocentric point of view. So you look at the list, it'll be 100 people, and it'll be like 85 Caucasians and probably 15 Asians. Asians being in the middle. One thing I like about Asian empires, them being, and I wouldn't even say Asian because they usually, when I look at the list, I usually see Oriental. I don't usually see Indians on the list too much. But I mean, I've only seen like 3 or 4. Maybe they do, but for the most part, they tend to be mostly Orientals. One thing I like about the Asiatic empires is because they're in the middle. Most of the time, no matter if you're coming from an Afrocentric point of view or Eurocentric point of view, you probably would find common ground in Asia, to be honest, for the most part. So I respect it, like from that angle. I mean, I respect the Asians a lot for that. But I do think it's a shame and a travesty in the sense that, there's not lists that have blacks and Latinos and Aborigines on it. Because at the end of the day, see, what has happened in modern man, and this is, to my opinion, why modern society has fallen, is that we look at things like airplanes, we look at things like medicine, right? We look at things like electricity. We look at things like science, the various scientific fields, and we pretend that the ancients never did it. We pretend that when we look at it, wow, they knew about astronomy and astrology, right? They knew about, Sirius and stuff like certain constellations when they didn't have telescopes. So how do they know about it? They built the pyramids. We can't build the pyramids now. We ignore all these things, right? We just ignore it, throw them out, right, as modern society. And that's part of the problem, where you even see now with even health, when people are saying, wait, maybe we need to go back to the caveman days. They were healthier, in a sense, right? We had to start practicing the primitive diet. Well, I think in some ways, that's exactly one of the reasons why modern society is so messed up. It's messed up because we're dealing with a power, people who, or groups that might run the world, that people make up all kinds of theories about how they run the world, and they, whether it's from financial, theories, right? Financial theories. It could be, occultism. People have all kind of ways of how they control the world, either through banking or many different areas, right? But I'm not gonna say that's not true. But the main way they control the world is through the mind. See, the mind is the most powerful instrument you're born with. If you allow someone to place limitation in your mind, your body's not going anywhere. Sometimes the 5% used to say first God body, then God mind. I'm sorry, first God mind, then God body. If your mind is messed up, you're done. So what they have done is they place limitations on minds, how we think. And one beautiful thing about living in today's society is that it's global, in a sense. And even though there's resistance, in a lot of ways, we're one nation. And when I say this, I'm not talking about, like, in a sense of kumbaya, like we all love each other. No, I'm not talking about that. Obviously, we don't. I'm talking about from the standpoint of that we all influence each other, even if your conscious mind doesn't understand it. That's the thing, right? A lot of times, people's conscious, like, for instance, when Barack Obama became the president of the United States, there were some people in hip-hop who said, hey, if it wasn't for hip-hop, he would have never became president. I don't see how you could say that's not true, right? You could say it's not true because you can't put all the different puzzles together, right? When you look at it, you say it doesn't make any sense, right? He's not even really a hip hop guy. Yeah, but some of the people who were voting for him may have been, let's say, some of the suburban people, suburban white kids who might have voted for him. Well, not the kids, but maybe the people now in their 30s and 40s. 20 years ago, they were kids listening to hip hop and opened their mind up. Yeah, it's possible. So it wouldn't get. So then, in a sense, it wouldn't directly, right, get credit for it. But yeah, it did get credit. I mean, in a sense, yeah. I mean, there's no question, right? They could have influenced him becoming president, or one of the contributing factors. I wouldn't say it's the whole as everything, because that's ridiculous. But it's one of the contributing factors of him becoming president. When they had the Arab Springs, the revolutions in various parts of the Middle East about 5-6 years ago. I mean, hip hop was one of the things that was flaring it up. Arab rappers, in a sense. Now, would there have been Middle Eastern Arab rappers if Kool Herc didn't create hip hop? Probably not, right? So when you look at it, we often get influenced by things that we don't know we do, to be honest. And I think that's very important because, in a sense, when you talk about the world as a globalized community, even if you never heard of someone, right, whoever invented the hot dog and French fries and whatever you like, right, that you eat or that you consume or that you do every day, whether it's Windows, before we used to have complex operating systems. Now we have Windows. We just click on something and then we got it, right? Yeah, that may have been someone who invented that you may not never think about that person, but they still influenced you. And, in a sense, that's why I push psychology so much, because that gets into the difference between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. Your subconscious mind knows all this already. So it knows the influences that it received. The conscious mind doesn't. The interesting thing is you really can't do anything until your conscious mind understands what's going on. So that was one of the inspirations of me making this list. And it's 40 people. I'm going to break it up into 4 videos. This one I'm going to go from 31 to 40. And we're going to begin with Aleister Crowley, number 40. Him being influential, I don't see how you can argue that. The only argument you can come in is if he's a devil worshiper, he's all kind of stuff that you hear about him. But in terms of making the occult accessible to the everyday person, right? The fact that you have, and I'm not even a fan of more magicians myself, right? Or people just read a book and, claim they're magicians. So I'm not even a fan of that myself. But I do admit, a lot of people may not have access to fraternal orders. So I'm talking about a lot of sincere people may not have access to fraternal orders. People like Aleister Crowley made it accessible to the world. And I don't think you can deny that. Jack Parsons, one of the people who were instrumental in nuclear propulsion for NASA, right? He was Aleister Crowley's student, for God's sake. When you see all these celebrities become brainwashed by Scientology, again, good or bad. Ron Hubbard, very much influenced by Scientology. One of the founders of modern Wicca, not because real Wicca is much older than modern Wicca, but modern Wicca influenced by Aleister Crowley. I mean, when you look at it from the occult standpoint, you can't argue it. Even from people who know what they're talking about with the occult, they still give him credit because he merged East and West together. In a sense, he came up with a system that merged the different yogas and different Buddhist meditation techniques with Kabbalah. Right? He merged where before that you had to keep them separate. He merged them both together. So his influence cannot be understated. He will be 40 because obviously he went crazy eventually the end. And in a way, if you were a person who's a sincere practitioner of the occult, probably you would not do what he did exactly, right? You would read up on him, you read his theories, you might, give him props like that. The theoretical part of you might give him respect, but when it comes to following what he actually did, in terms of energy work and different meditative techniques and, his occult path in general, you probably would navigate and go a different way. But if he never made those mistakes, you wouldn't have been able to do that before. Because that's what will naturally happen to people who don't get the training. When you're a learned man and you don't really have occult training, you're going to have to make mistakes like that. So you could look at his mistakes and not do it. Right? That in itself is influential. So there's no question he'll be 40th on the list. And I think that's why he would actually be 40th on the list, because there's no question he might even be higher if he didn't make mistakes like that, but he did. So, it's only so much. I mean, some people would be bothered that he's on this list right now, but there's no question I couldn't make a list without him. And I think in modern lists, occultism is never touched, and it's sad because when you talk about people like Newton, right? Newton and Nikola Tesla, these guys were occultists. So when I see these people on lists, and the people making the list pretend they weren't, so that's why I had to make lists like this, because everything has to be put on the forefront to those who want to know. Many people are going to see this and get emotional and not, they see Aleister Crowley and they say, or they'll say, I don't have enough of this race on the list. I don't have enough of this race on the list. Like, that's common, to be honest. But for the sincere person who wants to know right? What's influencing their subconscious mind? Because in the end of the day, that's what it is. Remember, subconscious mind of all beings in the planet are linked to each other to some extent. So everyone is influencing everyone, even if your conscious mind doesn't know it. So Aleister Crowley, number 40. Number 39, gotta go Bill Gates. Nothing needs to be said. Again, good or bad. I mean, Windows, Microsoft, revolutionary in itself. I mean, there's no way, like, they made computers. In a sense, you didn't need programmers to do certain things for you. You didn't need to do codes. Any person could use a computer now. Like, older people now are still intimidated by computers, and computers just a point and click. I mean, realistically now, to get when you get a computer back in the days, you had to get a programmer to come and program it in your house. Now, your computer, once you turn it on, you press yes or no to certain things, computer's programmed, right? People like Bill Gates, instrumental in that. But more than him, his mind as an inventor, I think with Bill Gates, when he first rose to success, it was amazing because people started paying attention to who's the richest people in the world. They didn't really the average person didn't really necessarily pay attention to that list as much. They may pay attention to celebrities. Yeah, average people always been into celebrities, but he came in and people had started paying attention to the richest people in the world. People started having dreams of, wow, I could be working as a janitor and I make an idea I could become a billionaire. Now, even if that's not the case, it still was instrumental in limitations starting to become stretched and weakened. Better that. Limitations started to become weakened. I mean, it was important that he was a factor in that. And there's no question that he would have to be number 39 just because of that, without a doubt. Now, number 38 would be Inayat Khan. Now, Mr. Khan, I would have to give number 38 because, Sufism is probably my favorite spiritual system. Not even close, right? He brought it to the West. He brought it to the West, but he emphasized more love and harmony. And it got a little bit watered down with the New Age community running with it sometimes and making their own little fake Sufism. But there was no question that he hit something that was very important. Because when people started analyzing his work, they started seeing that it could extend outside Sufism, right? And this is what happens. Sufism in general is older than Islam. A lot of Muslims hate to hear that, but it is older than Islam. The two got linked together because they both were into submission, right? If you look at any religion, there's no religion that's going to go into submission as much as Islam. Sufism was all about submission, right? And submission and making yourself open for that higher force to come through you. Right, and that higher force could be love. Not love the way people think, selfish love, love in terms of human relationships. Love in terms of unity, where you understand that everything around you is part of you. It's important, and it doesn't mean that you have to see, because when the fake love that people produce, that people push, would say, "Oh, I can love my enemy, let him kill me." No, you could love your enemy. It doesn't mean you have to let him kill you. In fact, you might have to kill your enemy, but you can kill him, still love him. That's the difference. And in a way, that's when the corruption took place, because they just jumped on the love part. But his work was instrumental, because when I'm making this list, it's not just for now. See, what I'm trying to do is combine some of the ancient times, some of the ancient, even indigenous cultures that you wouldn't even know about, but fuse it with modern, with modern accomplishments of certain people, but fuse it in such a way that when this time period is over, you could relook at this list and say, okay, I see what he was talking about. Because what's going to happen with a lot of people's lists, is like a banker. It's like a banker paying you to make a list, to be honest. You have 100 people, right? 85 or 90s from Europe, 10 is from the Orient, right? No ancients, no blacks, no Latinos, no Native Americans, no Muslims, no Arabs, right? Even though the Muslims are the ones who, when Rome fell, they're the ones who saved Europe, right? And when you say the Muslims who saved Europe, it's cool because they're North Africans, so you could include blacks again and some of the Arabs, right? Because the Moors were kind of a combination of both. Some of the original Moors were black, obviously, became more mixed over time. They were into Sufi and Islam, so you had Arabs amongst them, right? Eventually, it got the two races got intertwined. So when you're saying the North African empires, you're actually saying a few different empires at the same time. Or a few different cultures at the same time merge into one. But all that stuff is forgotten with modern lists. So later on, like 200 years from now, almost no one will probably pay attention to modern lists if it continues to go as it is, right? So Mr. Khan is extremely important for Sufism because I think his style of Sufism started to get. First of all, he brought it to the West. Most Westerners would even know about Sufism was for him. But his style of Sufism started to let people understand that Sufism is beyond just traditional Islam, even though Islam is the only modern system that you could probably fuse with it perfectly because they both kind of adhere to the same thing, in a sense. This is a Sufism is much more tolerant. That's the main difference, and it would naturally go to other cultures and try to merge itself with the other cultures where modern mainstream Islam would just try to erase other cultures. So that's the difference. But they both do center around submission, which is really the only religion that's supposed. If you're gonna have a religion, that's supposed to be the only religion that you have. So Mr. Khan would definitely be 38. Most people will say, "Wow, he's ahead of Mr. Gates," but yeah, no question. I mean, at the end of the day, Bill Gates is, still created a corporation. I mean, most people don't really remember like throughout history, you don't really remember rich people per se. You might remember rulers, warriors, rich people. If you remember them because their family's still in power. The only rich people you remember are rich people whose families are still in power. And unfortunately for Mr. Gates, I don't know if that's going to be the case. So, Mr. Khan is number 38. If you don't know about him, look him up. Pretty cool. Next person is Oduduwa, and he's going to be interesting now. Oduduwa is the founder of Yoruba culture, in a sense. Very important because I think the Yoruba culture is maybe one of the most underrated cultures you have. I mean, I'm not going to say it is the most, but definitely top 5. I mean, think of it, right? It's not the only culture in Nigeria, right? You could say it's not even a major. I mean, it's a major culture in Nigeria, but the other tribes or cultures who could rival it. But it's definitely, no question, you could say part of the founding cultures of Nigeria, right? And Nigeria being the most populous country in Africa. But you go outside Nigeria, you come to the West. I mean, can you argue? I mean, realistically, when you talk on the West right now, right? Really, you got the English, you got the Spanish, you got the Portuguese, you got the indigenous cultures. But you can make the argument outside of the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the British, because indigenous cultures kind of got diminished off of numbers. You can make the argument the fourth most influential culture, and this is what's amazing, that doesn't get any play, but the fourth most influential culture is definitely going to be the Yoruba. When you consider Brazil, like especially if you consider Latin America for the most part, and then you consider Haiti was kind of influenced by Yoruba, but they have influences, obviously. Fulani, Ewe, Fon. Yeah, different influences in Haiti. So I would give the Yoruba maybe a contributing factor to Haiti. But when it comes to South America, Brazil, right? Certain English-speaking Caribbean, because islands, not much, but certain one like Trinidad, Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico, bar none. The Yoruba is so influential, even places that didn't have that much Yoruba slaves. They had a few Yoruba slaves, and they were more popular by other slaves. The Yoruba culture overpowered everyone else. So there's no question. You can make this argument, no question, that they're fourth. And you could even make the argument, realistically, they're fourth, but they could rival anyone else, if you think about it. Because when you look carefully, it's like, even in the English-speaking world, Santeria, Candomblé, like I said, Haitian voodoo is kind of, and going into Louisiana voodoo, Yoruba is only one of many contributing factors to them. But I would say this though, the voodoo practice in the New World is gonna be different than voodoo. It's slightly different than the voodoo practice in Africa, because the voodoo practice in Africa wouldn't have Yoruba elements in it. So again, you're gonna go back to Yoruba culture, and if you go back to Yoruba culture, Oduduwa definitely deserves to be number 37. In a lot of ways, you could say if you're gonna have a name of this list that you're annoyed with me, and you say it should be higher. If you want to say him, go ahead, right? And it's funny because in a way, when you look at it, Oduduwa you can see, in my opinion, I've always talked about Sufism, Islam being spiritual systems of the future. I think the Yoruba-based cultures and spiritual systems, the counterparts in the West, I think that there's still spiritual systems in the future as well, in the sense that they obviously are old, but I do think you're not going to see them slow down, if that makes any sense. You're not going to see them slow down. And I think because of that, him being, for some people, one of the first rulers of Nigeria or of that territory when his brother Batla couldn't do the job. And he's a very controversial figure, right? For many different angles. But he definitely deserves to be number 37, and there's no question that influence, when you look at the potential influence that, because look at Nollywood, because you're talking about Yoruba culture. So when you say Nollywood, right, again, many of you never heard of it, but it's the third most popular movie industry in the planet, behind Hollywood and Bollywood. Well, you got Nollywood, you got Yoruba spiritual systems, right? You even have, in general, because for me, if I had to make a top 10 African, like top 10 power chart for Africa, you would definitely be top 5. And when you look at it, even other African cultures or countries, right, that you would have where they will have different spiritual systems, they all even kind of intertwine. Not all of them do, but a lot of them kind of intertwine with the Odisha system. Be like, yeah, and they know what the Odishas are, if that makes any sense. Like, you may not have someone from Central Africa knows a god from South Africa, right? Or knows a god from East Africa. But no matter where in Africa you go, everyone knows who Shango is. That's the power of Oduduwa. And no question, he deserves to be in this list. If you want him to be higher, I can't argue with you. But his influence cannot be underestimated at all. Now, number 36 will be Malcolm X. There's nothing really need to be said as much. Again, I think if he didn't die, he would have been probably... See, when people look at this list, a lot of mainstream people are not going to like that name on the list, right? So I could say if he didn't die, I could say what this about Malcolm. If Malcolm didn't die, his contribution to civilization would not be able to be disputed. But for black folk, there's no question how high Malcolm is. In fact, you can make the argument, and I seriously believe this. Really ask black folk, like once they get, especially if the person is proud of their blackness or like not totally brainwashed, I don't even think you could even argue that they would put Malcolm over Martin Luther King. There's no question about it. They would put They would put Malcolm X over Martin Luther King. There's no question about it. For this list, because it's a universal list, I had Malcolm 36, Martin number 34. If this was a list for contributions to black people or black culture, again, I don't want to take anything away from Martin Luther King, but I can see I might actually put Malcolm over Martin. But this is a universal list, so I got Malcolm at 36, Malcolm at 34. But regardless, Malcolm, for me personally, coming up, definitely inspiring. No question. I mean, he inspired me to even travel. As a kid coming up, when I saw his progression, it was like when Malcolm traveled, it was a totally different Malcolm. I never forget when they asked him about, white people in Europe versus white people in America. What's the difference? And he said, white people in America. When a white person in America, when a white person in Europe, like let's say, can see you and you're black and they're white, and they say, oh, you're black and I'm white, it's an observation, right? When a white person in America says you're black and, you're black and I'm white, it means they're the boss. And I was a kid and I was like, wow, I was like, that was a pretty deep quote, and I was like shocked, right? And that was Malcolm travel. That was Malcolm when he started to expand. When he started to expand, and before it was white supremacy. Eventually, he started breaking down capitalism. Started breaking down the seeds of globalization. Like, his travel changed him. Didn't make him less proud of his blackness, but it opened up his mind, if that makes any sense. And I think there's no question he was an awesome debater, and he was self-taught. I don't think, and he was a hustler. Something that his people, right, like the everyday black person, could kind of relate to more. Not in terms of all black people hustlers, but the fact that he was that and he made himself into something better. His story was more influential to the people who he was serving. So, no question, he was number 36. And I do think he's 36 because some people may say, well, what did he do to overall human society? And I think the contributions, because a lot of people make this list, these type of lists, they tend to be heavy in inventions or in philosophy. But I think music, and I do think, what's the word I would say? Just being able to influence cultures with just who you are, right? I don't think could be underestimated, to be honest. And I think African Americans get underappreciated on obviously on purpose. And I think this is not as much about Malcolm being number 36 as more African American contributions getting not appreciated. And if you talk about African American culture, you cannot talk about Malcolm X. So for me, that's why he's number 36 for sure. And I think, for some people, they would want him to be higher. And I said, like, again, if this was a list for this list, he's number 36. This is a more universal list, but that doesn't mean that takes away from his contributions, if that makes any sense. So Malcolm definitely will be 36 for sure. Cesar Chavez would be number 35. He's going to, some people describe him as the Mexican Martin Luther King in terms of his influence. His entry here, it's similar to Malcolm and Martin. I would say I liked him a lot for his ability to boycott, which was pretty important at the time. I also liked him for the ability to be able to use, he researched a lot of different emblems. And he researched colors, and he saw which colors would work the best when put together, which I think was genius, right? No question about it. Him being 35 on this list, I wish I could put everybody number one. He was a legend in a sense, and I like the fact that he stood up for farm workers. I think, in the tarot, the Fool card, which is the first card, right, is associated with the Hebrew letter Aleph, which usually means agriculture. Well, it doesn't mean agriculture, but it's tied into agriculture. And farmers is something where are very much underappreciated. But when they talk about the Garden of Eden, what's a garden, right? A garden is something that if you were into farming or a gardener or a botanist, you'll be in charge of. And a lot of times you can look at it as one of the reasons why we don't thrive as a society is because we don't understand plants. We don't give farmers the respect that they're supposed to have, in a sense. And he fought for those people. And him being Mexican, he was born, I think, in Yuma, Arizona, or near Yuma, Arizona. He was Mexican American. I think Mexicans go underappreciated for their contributions. And I think when you look at it carefully, when you realize that California, Texas was once part of Mexico, and the fact that as workers right now, they hold up a lot. If you take them away, a lot of things will crumble within America. In fact, when you look at even the contributions of Mexican culture, in terms of Latin American culture, the only cultures that would rival it in terms of right now, in terms of when you look at the mindset of Latin America, because all the novellas are coming from Mexico, right? When you look at it carefully, maybe Cuba, Brazil, but then Brazil, because it's Portuguese, I think doesn't influence the minds of the everyday Latino as much as Mexico does, to be honest. Cuba, Puerto Rico, you want to say for their size, they're even more influential. You can make the argument for that. But in general, when you start talking about the novellas, when you start talking about the size, when you start talking about Mexico's importance as a medium-range culture, like as much as people may talk about drug cartels or the bad stuff going on in Mexico, Mexico is a second world nation. It's not third world anymore. And its contributions are underappreciated. When you look at the fact that you could have like 100 million Mexicans in Mexico, then they have like 20 million in America. Their contributions, especially when you talk about even to America itself, which America itself is the most influential nation currently, right? So when you look at it, they have their own nation and they do so much to help ours, to influence ours, to work for ours. And in a sense, ours, man, a lot of this stuff was theirs, really. Cali, Texas, those are important pieces. And I think, just like how I said, when you put African American culture to the forefront, you gotta put Malcolm and Martin. You gotta put Cesar Chavez for this as well. So him being 35, no question about it. Number 34, Martin Luther King. What could we say? Everyone around the world knows that name, right? I mean, he gets credit for helping segregation take several steps back. I mean, even other nationalities wouldn't be able to move. Even they don't even realize it either. But he freed up for all nationalities when it comes to certain types of freedoms in terms of segregation, right? There's not that much you could say. I mean, him being 34 is no question, bar none. I mean, I think sometimes he gets underappreciated because I think sometimes people take shots at him and talk about, well, we need to be violent, but I think he understood power, and I think Martin took his approach, because you know how I said Malcolm was very much connected to the struggle, the everyday black person. I think Martin was the complete opposite. I think he knew it, the struggle of the everyday black person, but he didn't experience it directly as Malcolm did because his family is a little bit more wealthy. But I think Martin also knew about, which a lot of other African Americans don't, that there was probably, I mean, people talk about slavery, right? People, obviously, that's something that people talk about. But what people don't talk about is that there was black folks after slavery who economically broke themselves out of it, in a sense, right? Where they accumulated a lot of wealth, right? Even some who were maybe they were slaves, but in the master's house, that they broke free, they were educated, and they got money, and they got some influence, and he understood all this. So when he did what I'm trying to show people what he have to do, in a sense, power is really about being able to integrate yourself with different networks. Even when people talk all this revolutionary stuff, if they really be paying attention, most revolutionaries start with a handshake that you never seen, right? Someone else, like let's say, I'm just making an example. Canada's fighting France. French is rich, Canada's not. I'm just giving an example. Canada beats France. They have a big revolutionary war. I guarantee you someone in France was backing someone in Canada, right? Don't have to be the majority of the Canadian elite, of the French elites, just at least one, to back that coup de grace, or that revolution. And the revolution could happen. If they didn't back it, the revolution wouldn't happen. And I think sometimes people want to fight the power structure, and they don't understand how the power structure is run. And that's why they lose, to be honest. And I think Martin really understood the power structure. I give him that. And so when I look at Martin, I look at him completely different than even black people or white people look at him as. How the mainstream looks at him, I don't look at Malcolm like that. Like he said, Martin, I'm sorry, as Martin said, and this doesn't get reported. Yes, he was against segregation. He wanted all of us to be one, but he did say either you have. I mean, everyone talks about his speeches when he didn't want segregation, but he did say either you fully integrate or you fully segregate. You can't have it in between. And right now we have it in between, right, where it's kind of integrated, but it's not. And that's why we have problems. But everyone pushes he wanted full integration. Now he said either full integration or full segregation. That never gets said. That's why to me his legacy is kind of tarnished, because I think the mainstream has kind of hijacked it and presented a part of Martin what they wanted to present. That's the difference. Number 33, Keith Tantlinger. He was the engineer that influenced the person who made shipping as we know it possible. I think the shipping industry is very underrated. When you look at it, our whole world is really from shipping. As much as people talk about manufacturing would not mean anything if we didn't have the ability to ship. The ability to ship has really connected the world, even more so than even this whole internet stuff. Because internet stuff is good, but being the advances that we had in the shipping industry in general has taken the world to a whole nother level. Where back in the days, I mean, like everyone knows, if you were in Europe, Africa, Asia, you didn't even care about them. Either you didn't know about America, or it was something that was an afterthought to you. Or even if you were in one of those other three continents, right? You didn't really think about them because they were so far. Shipping has erased all that. And he made it possible, to be honest. He was the one who influenced the person who really made the first step to shipping. And I always said engineers don't get respect. And he definitely deserves respect. He's number 33. Number 32. This is going to be fun. The Wright brothers. Now, the Wright brothers get credit for invented the airplane when they didn't. Airplanes, the concept of airplanes existed way before them. In fact, 7,000-year-old Indian texts speak about invention of airplanes. And this was actually my inspiration for the video, because this is an example of the ancients understanding things that modern society is taking credit for. And stuff like this is why we have taken several steps back in modern times. So when you look and see who's number one on my list, you know, you're going to see he's an Egyptian doctor, ancient Egyptian doctor. You're like, he's number one? And you're going to see why. Because I think, in a sense, when you look, a lot of true progress that we're supposed to have as a culture hasn't really come, because we have not, in a sense, given credit to the ancients and actually look at their work with respect and improve on their work or maintain their work. We actually looked, couldn't do it, took steps way down, and now coming back up, but we come back up to where they already were 6,000 years ago. It's a problem. He was talking about planes in texts that are 7,000 years old. That means even the concept of the plane is older than that. That means this is going to shock people in a sense. There probably was way more communication between ancient cultures than we're even admitting, to be honest. When Alexander saw Indian priests, when Alexander the Great, when he came to Alexandria, Egypt, conquered it, he saw Indian priests walking around Egypt like nothing. He was like, what's going on? Because Egyptians and Indians were been interacting with each other. The ancients were interacting with each other a lot more than people think. Were they interacting with each other as much as we are today? No, probably not. I'll give you that. But they were interacting with each other to some extent. And them giving the Wright brothers credit for building planes, when the planes, I still have the Wright brothers on the list, because the concept of the airplane is extremely important for shipping, for even travel, communication. I mean, airplanes is no question. That was an extremely important invention. And no question, if I had to make top 30 inventions that changed the world, that'll probably be number 5 or top 5 easily. So they're on the list, along with the Indian counterpart whose name I can't pronounce. You know, you can look up the name though. You see it on the list. He's the real inventor. They're sharing the number 32 spot. The number 31 spot is Adolf Hitler. I know people are going to look at it and say, why would he be on the list? I mean, he was influential. Everyone knows his name. Everyone knows what a dictator is because of him. When he lost World War II, every powerful leader knows he only lost. Every leader knows now from the future he only lost because he attacked Russia and America at the same time. You never do that, obviously. Don't attack those two superpowers. You put those two superpowers against each other. You don't attack them. You don't attack them together. You know, at the same time, you will lose. That goes for any revolutionary, right? See, when I put him on this list, it's for his mistakes. This goes for any revolutionary, right? When you could look at the Soviets, you could look at America, and you could say, well, they both are the same, right? Same, I guess you could say, not nationality, but same race in terms of if you're into that racial stuff. But trust me, if you come up with a game plan, you come up with a game plan if you want to. That's what you're into of attack. You attack one, but you don't attack both of them. The other one, you just leave alone, to be honest. And I think Hitler's fall really speaks about that in volumes, in a sense. And I think, you know, he made plans. You know, he was instrumental in the current German highways. And at the time, you know, like a speed limit, like a highway with no speed limit. He was like one of the first people to think about that in modern times. And that was revolutionary in itself at the time. And his people loved him. His people loved him so much that they would do anything he said. And again, this is not about good or bad, but in terms of influence, when you talk about leaders, think of it. When you talk about leaders or emperors or people who, even if you say what to follow and what not to follow, he would have to be on the list because everyone knows his name. And when everyone knows your name, you can't say you're not influential. So this is 31 to 40. Next up, we can start to go higher. So till next time, peace.